Support for the CivicSciTV network comes from listeners and viewers like you, and organizations such as the Rita Allen Foundation, which invests in transformative ideas in their earliest stages to leverage their growth and promote breakthrough solutions to significant problems. Go to ritaallen.org to learn more. Making sense of the latest developments across the civic science landscape by dissecting new insights from civic scientists and practitioners in academia, government, for-profit, and non-profit organizations. This is Questions of the Day with Fanuel Muindi.
Well, welcome to the program. Now, this week we have an important conversation to have, and I'm so glad that Stephanie Okeyo, whom you'll meet shortly, has decided to join us for this. So she's a microbiologist and science communicator. She's a founder director of the Under the Microscope, UTM, a nonprofit organization advancing science and innovation infrastructure in Africa through education, societal engagement, and research. Now, recently, UTM has been conducting a participatory research on the challenges and opportunities related to the access and distribution of funding of science engagement initiatives around the world. Now, we have covered funding quite a bit in my program, and we know this is an issue around the world. Well, they and her organization have been doing this global study of funding for science engagement. So she joins me today to tell us more about the study, importantly, but also zoom in a little bit on Africa to understand what she's been learning from her work in that sphere. So, Stephanie, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Fanuel. It's a pleasure to be here.
So let's just start high level. Tell us about how this study came about.
That's an interesting question. The conversation of the study came about a workshop that we attended. And this culture of going to workshops, conferences, you talk about issues, and then you have great ideas, you meet nice, amazing people doing amazing work, and then it ends from there. So I think it's the shelf life of the conversations we have in workshops. So we had one in Falling Walls, a workshop organized for science engagers in Kenya. And we were discussing three key barriers of science engagement or challenges in science engagement landscape. So funding was one of them, reaching out to marginalized communities, and also institutionalization of science engagement. And for my group at that particular workshop, we were looking at science engagement and funding. And we all agreed it was an issue. But I think post the festival, and this is when Corona hit 2020, we were like, okay, we challenged ourselves commitments to action. We call them commitments to action. We've discussed or highlighted these issues. How do we go about doing some actions within it or within the issues we're talking about? And that's where the study came about. Because when we started scouting and looking for information around public engagement and funding, we couldn't find one. And back as a scientist, back to basics is like, okay, there is no information in this. It's not evidence-based. We know it's an issue, we talk about it, but is there data supporting it? And that's how we came about it. We're like, let's get some data from people's lived experiences. And this is funders and science engagers. So the people get the money and the people give the money.
I see.
Yeah.
And so, as I mentioned earlier, this is a global issue, right? And you're looking at this from different countries, US, Europe. I would like to focus a little bit here on what you've been learning from engaging those potential funders, right, in the African continent. And feel free to pick us on a specific country if you wish. But are you able to give us a sense of sort of the landscape of funding for science engagement in Africa?
Mm-hmm. So one thing maybe to note, when we started, actually, we had a key interest in only looking at the African context because I'm based in Africa, and my colleague at that time was from Ghana. But we started realizing majority of the money comes from beyond the continent. So that's why we gave it a global scope. But to come back to your question in terms of the African landscape is that, first of all, majority of the funding does not come from the continent. We don't have philanthropy organizations. We don't have government grants that come supporting science engagement work, and also majority of the work done within science engagement is youth initiatives or programs, so project programs. So if before I get even to the funding, we need to understand first of all the engagement landscape, and first of all that there is not so much support or recognition of the work itself, or even the term engagement. It most of it goes into public engagement within the research institution, which is done within a project, but not externally as a continuity of a long-term project. So
Yeah.
this is a communication, it's a branch of research, of a research project. So that, so the landscape in Africa, first of all, it's still new. It's still, let me compare and be very specific. You see somewhere like South Africa has the SASTA. So this is the association, or the national body in charge of public engagement, and they have a public engagement strategy, national strategy. When you come to places like Kenya, we're not yet there, and we don't have funding specifically for that from the national bodies. But if you look somewhere like Europe, they have the, you said they have associations around just science engagement. And if you look somewhere like US, they have the funders network. So if you still look in Africa, we don't have yet a body that specifically looks at the engagement work or science engagement and communication landscape. So funding still is an issue because there are no structures within itself, the science engagement landscape. Yeah.
And I think
And
and sorry to jump into a little bit. One of the areas as well to distinguish between STEM programming, right? That is kind of like formal STEM programming funding separately from the informal STEM engagement. So you're talking about the informal side of things, right? The community engagement, right? That goes into communities and engages all different types of audiences, right? Science communication, for example, initiatives and so forth. Is that right?
Yes, Fanuel. That's actually an interesting point because one of the things we were asking in this study is what is science engagement or communication to them, and the terminologies, because there's this whole aspect of terminology that we need to understand as it's used interchangeably. In this case, I talk about informal STEM education or engagement, in which it is a program not associated specifically with a national program. Most of the time you find it's grassroots initiatives that people come by, or it's a school outreach that mushroomed to a program. For example, ours was a science blog that mushroomed now to a nonprofit organization. I speak of informal science communication, science engagement, public engagement that is not within the normal structures.
I see. I see. So terminology, as we all know, it's very important in this case. So where are the opportunities here, right? Because I think in doing this work, you're hoping to highlight that there are, yes, challenges. Funding is limited, and but what opportunities are you, at least in your work so far? Where are these opportunities? Where are you seeing them?
So I think when we look at where, I'll put this in terms of funding, first of all, because before we are in a space where we're encouraging people to do science engagement. But the big question, even we were trying to ask with this, is there an environment that supports it? In this case, a financial environment, because you could not be encouraging a space when you have not created conducive environments for it. So for this particular case, if you look at where money goes, it's particularly in research or academic institutes. And now with how the research culture is, there is more encouragement of participatory research. And if you look at participatory research mainly, and you look at how science engagement or public engagement is done, there is now more opportunity with it now being mandatory in most, even in your proposal where you have to have a communication or engagement plan. There is now a gap or I don't say a gap, but a channel for people within these informal spaces, people like us, to come in and bring in collaboration with scientists or research institutions or academic institutions, because we are directly in touch with community. We are not limited to research structures of how research work is supposed to be done. And there is more creativity and innovation within this. You see people using different mediums with how they reach out to people. And there is more authenticity and also real connection with people. So I think as the research space becomes now more participatory, there is more space for people who do informal, I'll say informal in this case, informal public engagement,
Mm.
and bring about collaboration. Because when we say collaboration in research, we don't mean only within the scientific community. It's both scientific and non-scientific.
Right.
And this people like us are bridge between this.
Yeah.
Um,
And I'm
yeah.
curious, in terms of, you mentioned earlier the funding and that there's this need that is there, right? I was wondering if you can dig a little bit more there on the need. Can you tell us more about the people that want to do this work and they're facing this barrier of lack of funding? And I'm curious if you can talk specifically about Kenya and even more so Nairobi, where you are based.
hmm So I think if you look at most people who get into this space, they're either scientists or have a scientific background, or none at all, but are interested in societal or environmental issues, and brings in the aspect of science. And majority of them come in as passion. So it's either passion, they are interested really in engaging the public with scientific concepts or understanding more about our world. The other thing is people who come in due to requirement, and maybe due to a research, it's part of your research work that you're supposed to engage the public, or you're doing a citizen science project. So I'll speak mostly for people who come in who are not attached to an academic or research institute, because I find that is the space that has more challenges. So you find this is done as a part-time, majority of people. It is not a sustainable space because it's done either as a part-time project or a side project or a one-time project, or there isn't any sustainability in it because there are no operational grants. If you look at the funding structure, majority of them are project-based grants. So if I get 20,000 and maybe it's only 2,000 or 5,000 I can go to my operational grant, what happens after the project? It
Mm.
means I'm not able to sustain my activities. And that is the main challenge within this space, is that there are no sustainable systems or financial structures for work to continue. So I'm going to be specific, like Kenya, and compare with South Africa. South Africa has some national grants or avenues you could get for specific engagement work. In Kenya, there isn't a national call or calls available that somebody like I could apply for. I'm not attached to a research institute. I'm not attached to an academic institute. India is doing also a little bit the same. At least has some open call grants that go about this. And speaking of also the type of grants, you find majority of them are closed grants for some spaces. So it's only somehow at times the same people, or you find the people scouting um, the pool of people, there is no diversity in it. And sometimes you find in Africa people are doing amazing work, but they don't have that much of a digital footprint. So it's not easy to find them because that is just not a priority. When you're a small organization or you're doing a small initiative, you have limited resources. So you sometimes, is it, am I going to be doing the work on the ground? Am I going to focus on the digital work and having a digital footprint? So I think also digital footprint is a limitation to who does what. Hence, you invite them to come and talk more about their work, and if possible, support their work.
Yeah, yeah.
So I
In fact,
think the barriers are there.
yeah. So actually, on your website, you have a map, right? I believe, where you began to map some of these initiatives, right, locally on the ground. And I really love this point that you bring up, that there's work on the ground that's taking place, right? And we're missing it because it's not in the digital world, right? And so whether it's a funder or those who are curious, you end up missing them, right? And so,
Mm-hmm.
so what is your, I guess, if you had a magic wand and you said I wish this could happen, what would you wish for at this point in time? That's maybe somewhat realistic that could happen. Is it more money? Is it like what is that sort of missing piece here that would actually move the needle?
Um, so I think from all our discussion, from whatever we'll speak today, majority of it comes from experience.
Mm-hmm,
I
mm-hmm,
speak of everything I speak of is something I have gone through as somebody who's trying to do work within this space.
mm-hmm.
And I know how extremely challenging it is, especially if you're trying to do it as an individual or a small group or not associated with a research or academic institution. For a magic wand, particularly in Africa, I'm going to say in Africa because that is the landscape I mainly relate to. Africa is not a country,
That's
50
right.
plus countries, but faces similarly same challenges. Um, I think, especially when it comes to funding, I think it's national support that is the sustainable way. So
Mm-hmm.
we have ministries of, for example, in Kenya, and I'm saying this to relate to other countries. We have Ministry of Science, Education. They have different names depending on the country you are. But for us, Ministry of Science, Technology, and Innovation, it should have a specific body or department for science and society. Whatever name you want to call it, science, public engagement, science, society. And from there, now start looking at, okay, map nationally who are the people we have on the ground that are doing this work, both in the academic sphere and non-academic sphere. And then from there, you could do trainings for people within this group. um, just we have so many entrepreneurial programs. Why couldn't we do that within the science engagement space? If you look in Kenya, it's a tech hub. But why couldn't we have now engagement hubs whereby you look at people doing this work and you train them? How do you evaluate your work? How do you brand your work? How do you write proposals? And then also now, and how do we create local funding, sustainable funding for people within doing country within this work? And I think for me that would be the magic one, is national support. Before
Yeah.
we even get to the philanthropy space, there needs to be a governmental buy-in within these spaces, because they're the ones with the networks with the schools, they're the ones with the network with the community initiative, they're the ones the network with the health centers for anyone doing within health. Yeah, so I think for me that would be the magic wand, um,
Yeah, I think
in
that's
whatever capacity.
yeah, and I think that's the challenge, right, all the time is what should be done and at what rate and when, right? All these questions to move the needle. Now, we began this conversation talking about that this is all in context of this global study that you've been doing, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so I wish we could just keep talking on and on and on, but we can't. So to just sort of bring back to where we started, can you tell us where the global study is at the moment in time and the timeline for it? Because I'm sure people will be curious to take a peek. And what is the vision for the this study? So a couple questions in there. Just tell us about where the study is headed and the future.
So, in terms of the study, we had put up a global call for anyone who identifies themselves as a science engager, and also reached out to funding organizations that over years have funded science engagement work. And we were able to interview over 40 science engagers, individual science engagers, and these were calls from 30 minutes to 1.5 hours. And so that is science engagers. And then on the funding side, we were able to speak to 8 funding organizations, 13 representatives. And right now we're in the process of analyzing that data. And we have put out um, the first phase report that shows what we've done so far in terms of the workshops we've put in, the people, not specifically individual names, definitely, but our reach so far and what we hope to do in the phase 2 and phase 3. So right now in the phase 2, which is analyzing the data, and from there we hope to share it. The most important part actually of this study was that it doesn't become a fancy project or research that we did and publish it and it stays all the data there. We want this to catalyze conversations and action. So for example, from the data we get from people's lived experiences working in this space, what could we do? What are the best practices coming out of here? What are the challenges that are coming out of here? What could different funding organizations learn from each other? What could funders from what could science engagers learn from the tips being given? Could a toolkit come from this? So we hope this information makes this space evidence-based, because for me, from my short experience, is that we do public engagement work is so important, we know, but there is less evidence particularly supporting the impact of this work, and the challenges and the opportunities within this space. So I think the main aim is to have evidence or data supporting whatever conversation we're having, and from there some actions that will come from these different spaces depending with the region.
Yeah. And I think for
Yeah.
and evidence, just to be clear as well, in a sense that you want evidence for funders who can then see that actually this is an investable or fundable space, right? That the dollar is actually having an impact, and then from those who are actually doing the work to know what's working, what isn't, and not having to redo the wheel, right? As you mentioned, Africa is not a country; it's a continent with many different countries and various different challenges, right?
Mm-hmm.
And earlier we talked a little bit about some of those challenges. So yeah, I think impact is going to mean different things to
Yeah,
different
different.
environments. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, different things with different tools, different priorities, because the priorities also change depending. For example, even let's just this is typical example. If you talk about genetically modified foods, when you talk about Africa, will be more of preservation of species or ethical, or more of the religion, or traditional ways. If you go to Europe, it will be more of the ethical aspect of it, and monopoly of the market itself. So that we could be talking the same thing, but the priorities are different,
Yeah.
just because of the cultural context, the economic context. And I think when we speak of Africa, the interesting thing when it comes to engagement is that people tend to look at them as challenges. So, for example, internet, digital infrastructure, it's quite large because we speak over 2,000 languages and there are so many tribes. So, there is the language aspect also of it. Um, and also there is the cultural context. So when you have such a diverse society, how do you go about talking about same issue but different contexts?
Mm.
So I think the best place even to do engagement and really learn about engagement will be in African countries, because it is so easy to slam things on the internet and say you're doing engagement, but it is another thing when you have to think of the people I'm connecting, I want to reach out, don't have a phone. So I literally have to go on the ground, talk to people who have respect, or community leaders, or have influencers within the community, sit down to learn what do people really know about this topic and what is really important for them, and then now coming to say, I think this is what we could do. It really trains you to go back to the basics of engagement, because I think in this world we live in with this digital madness sometimes, or overload, it is so easy to confuse the engagement that you put up on the screen and the work people do on the ground. I think that's why I'm very passionate about people who do this in the community level, because they really understand and it caters now to the needs of the people,
Mm.
but also a bridge to the scientific landscape. I use landscape a lot, but the scientific community. So I think if you really want to learn what engagement with people is, here is the best place, because you have to deal with a lot of factors, both conflicting and complementary.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So we clearly need to have you back. That's for sure. We look forward to seeing this report, at least the insights as you release them, and the tool that you've just mentioned as well. Very curious to see the development of that. I do encourage folks who are watching this, I think, click on the link below, look at the map that UTM has begun to develop. I believe your initial report or summary of your progress so far is on your website. Is that correct?
Yes, it's on the website under research work.
Yeah, so definitely do go there for that. So Stephanie, wonderful to have you on board. And if you do check out Stephanie's bio, quite impressive, might I add, below in the description. And we look forward to having you back soon. Thank you so much for sharing your lived experience. I think that's really crucial that you mentioned that earlier. Thank you so much.
And thank you, Fanuel, for this such platform of people sharing their lived experiences and voices and just insights.
Why do stakeholders choose the CivicSciTV network?
Oh, that's a great question.
Yeah, great question.
That's a good one.
That's a great question.
CivicSciTV. Top experts, great questions, new insights. Subscribe to the CivicSciTV network on YouTube and don't miss new insights from diverse stakeholders.